One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin, and can I remind those who are listening tonight that Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fierce to Hear and Fein An Phoblacht. For anybody who watched the Gerry Adams interview a few weeks back and tried to make sense of it, and I was there and I didn't make sense of it, you will see that he kept making joking references to a figure that you couldn't see. The figure was Richard McAuley, a long-time friend of mine, so I'm declaring an interest to begin. Richard McAuley works and has worked with Gerry for quite a long time. Quite often, Richard is mistaken for a member of the press because wherever Gerry is, wherever he appears and whatever press scrum he's engaged with, Richard is in the middle of it. Lots of people will probably know the work that he does. And that old saying, behind every great president, there's a great PA, is probably true. So my guest is R.G. McAuley, better known as Richard. So Richard, welcome to Scéalta.
Thank you, Joe. And I would remind folks who watched that interview that you were the one who was principally involved in the backstabbing rather than Gerry, but...
And that's what you call loyalty.
Yes, absolutely.
So I've known you for a long time. And I have to say that in terms of the task that you carry out on a daily basis, both at home in Ireland and in a global sense, it's key. It's key to the presentation of the Republican analysis of current events or future events. So tell me, if you like, where all that began. So what part of, you're clearly from Belfast, what part of Belfast are you from?
Well, the family, my mother's family are from St. Patrick's Parish. So they're from Lancaster Street, Frederick Street, in and around that general district. And I did some work on the family tree a few years ago. And as far back as I could find, and that was back to the 1850s, my mother's family, the McGrans, the McCools, were all in and around that area. After the Second World War, they moved over into Trinity Street in Carrickhill, which is where I was born. Although my brother, Shawnee, gives off to me because technically I was born in the RVH. So he was born in Trinity Street. He claims that he's the original Trinity Street Carrickhill person and I'm just a blow-in.
And after that, I assume at some stage you moved to Andersonstown?
Yeah, no, we were, like a lot of other folks, we were very fortunate. We had a growing family, so my mother and father managed to get a house up in Andytown. So we moved up to Corby Way, where I met Danny Morrison, another renowned, infamous Republican activist. We lived there up until I went to jail.
Before you were in jail, you were, I'm told, that mostly by you, but I'm told that you were a very, very diligent student. You were a good pupil, and you done quite well. So I assume that part of that is true. But what were your ambitions? What did you see? Did you see a life after school? And if so, what were your intentions to become?
Well, I mean, like a lot of young folks, I was lucky. I got the 11 plus. So I ended up in St. Mary's. A lot of friends in Andytown didn't at the time. They were in the, they ended up in the Glen Road Intermediate. Just for the record, the 11 was a horrendous system. Martin McGuinness did us all a favour when he scrapped it. And those who continue to try to pursue it do society a disservice by separating children out at that age. But anyway, I ended up in St. Mary's. Wanted to be a teacher, went through all the usual stuff, GCSEs, A-levels, and eventually ended up in Trench House for a few years, where I was doing all that you needed to do to become a teacher. But the backdrop to that was what was happening in the north at that time. I did A-levels in 1971.
Yeah.
Went into Trench House at the end of 71. So for those who remember, it was a traumatic, dangerous time in the north as the conflict was escalating. So it was. That's where I was heading, I thought, until I got stopped one night and well, that came to an end. And I went to a different university.
Well, which brings us, of course, to your imprisonment. And I always ask people this. I ask them for a number of reasons, and I know you a long time, and you're quite a private person. And despite your job as a senior PA, you're quite a quiet person. So, how was jail? How did you cope with jail? Was it the nightmare that I imagine it would be, or was it just let's do it? I'm here.
Well, I was fortunate, unfortunate in some respects, getting caught, but I was fortunate in that when I went into the Crum and then into Long Kesh, special category status existed. So our treatment was remarkably, dramatically different from that of the prisoners who came from the Republicans who came after the ending of special category status. So the cages, jail's jail, but it wasn't difficult. It's not nice being locked up. It's not nice being locked away from family, relying on letters to maintain contact with folks outside. But at the same time, the cages were not the worst place in the world to be. Entirely different. The H blocks, Armagh's women's prison, Portlaoise in the 70s, horrendous places. The folks who were in jail in England, I mean, one of my abiding memories is the morning that the news came through about Frank Stagg dying on hunger strike. That was jail. That was hard time.
Yeah. And really, that for me was the first time that I came across this fictional character, R.G. McAuley, and it was in forms of letter writing. I never assumed that anybody would really be called R.G. McAuley, a bit like P. O'Neill, and I'm assuming that's another fictional character. But how did you discover, or when did you discover this ability to put thought to paper?
I didn't discover it. To be honest, it was Harry Fitz. Harry Fitz was the OC of the cage, and I think he'd just been elected as OC, and he was putting together a staff. And one of the positions on the staff, it's a bit odd when you think about it, you're in jail. They wanted a PRO. So at the time I was doing an OU course, and Harry saw me doing the OU course, and I think he assumed that I could write. So he invited me to become the PRO for the cage. I thought it was a bit of a challenge, something to do. And I tried to take it seriously. And it was a period when Special Cat was coming to an end. So a lot of the letters that I was writing to the Republican News then, the Irish Press was a paper that was going then. They used to print occasionally the Irish News, rarely. The Andytown News, and I even got one or two into the Irish Times, was primarily about what was going on within the prisons. And it was primarily the argument about, well, here we are on one side, one end of the prison, we're political prisoners. We're treated as political prisoners. And a few hundred yards away, they've built these monstrous H blocks, and there are scores and then eventually hundreds of men going into those blocks, and they're being treated appallingly. And trying to point up the difference in the way that people were being treated and the hypocrisy of the British system in treating prisoners in that way, but also in arguing the politics. Because at the end of the day, it was all about criminalisation. It was about them trying to persuade, as you know, you were involved in the campaign on the outside. It was about trying to persuade people that Republicans were criminals and didn't deserve their support, should be rejected. So it's classic counterinsurgency strategy. And the letters primarily were about arguing the opposite, that we were political, that we had political objectives, and that the struggle was legitimate, and we had every right to pursue that struggle as long as the Brits were in Ireland.
Were you bitten by the bug? You know, you obviously, and I made the point earlier on, you're quite modest, but were you bitten by the bug of doing something that you knew you had stumbled upon or been thrust into, but you were quite good at putting thought to paper were you bitten by that bug? Did it seem to be that this is what you're going to do?
No. Let me tell you, every time I have to write anything, it's a chore. I have to psych myself up every time, whether it's a letter, a statement, an article, whatever it is. I have to psych myself up into a place where I feel comfortable about doing that bit of work. I never find it easy. I always find it hard.
Despite that, within a week of being released from prison, you end up in the press centre with me. so there's a bit of a contradiction somewhere there.
No, see, I made the mistake of when I got out of jail, I said to folks, listen, I'm back. Whatever you want me to do. And some bright spark, give me your address. And so I go around and talk to him. he has some work for you to do. And the next thing I know, I'm on 170 going, jeepers, creepers, Long Kesh was better than this place.
It probably was, right enough.
It was a thundering in place.
Another thing I think that it kind of amazes people, and it shouldn't, because the tenacity of prisoners, ex-prisoners, is something that's on show everywhere within the communities. You know, whether it's in community groups or whatever. Was there a moment of hesitation where you're thinking of going back to restudy to be a teacher, or going back to university, or back to wherever, and like, you know, taking a real life upon yourself as opposed to political struggle? Did that come into your thinking?
That's a good question. I have to say, honestly, I don't remember ever thinking of doing anything else. I mean, I wouldn't have minded having a job that actually paid money as opposed to being a Republican activist that didn't. But no, I don't think so. I mean, I sort of took a view. I've been writing about Republican politics for whatever the previous 3 or 4 years in the jail, and now was an opportunity to put some of that into practice. And I was very fortunate. I went into the press office. You were there. You're a very good teacher. You're a better teacher than I would have been a teacher if I got through Trench House. And I learned an awful lot. And at the time, we were also, if you remember, it wasn't just the Republican Press Centre. We were also, the Republican News and An Phoblacht had just merged. Yeah. It merged the month I got out. So I went back. I went in, I think, about a week or 2 weeks after I got out. So that process was just ongoing, and Danny was the editor, and it was on the run. People were writing the paper from call houses because people at the editorial staff had been arrested in the previous summer.
April 78, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so it was dangerous to be a writer for An Phoblacht Republican News. And we had the job of trying to make sure that they were fed, watered, had their cars on time, got all the stuff to Dublin, got it out to the printer and whatever else.
And distributed around the country.
Yeah, which I have to say, in all fairness, we should never forget. I mean, I never forget the drivers, those folks who actually delivered week after week, thousands of APRNs all across the north, getting stopped by the UDR, getting stopped by the Brits and the RUC, the hassle they went through, the danger they went through. It's remarkable.
I think possibly, just for the record, some of the most dangerous experiences was the cars that they were driving.
That's true.
None of the cars cost more than £50, because the idea was that you got the paper out and you didn't get stopped the following week. So if you had an ability to change a car, get another car, and so on and so forth.
That is a really nice way of putting it, Joe. That's a really nice way of putting it. The real reason why the cars were changed all the time was because they were breaking down. Not because somebody had this bright idea, oh, we need to change cars all the time. No.
It sounds better if it's a clever idea.
Oh, no, it's a clever idea. You see, that's why you were a good teacher. And
I mean, I remember that period very well, and it was both very exciting, very horrific, and for people who have that hidden ability to write, it was a great experience, you know, because for anyone who isn't old enough, 170 that you referred to, the Republican Press Centre, was really the Republican answer to a British propaganda machine that had unlimited funds and was sourced by teams of journalists and people who worked there full time and got well paid, as opposed to people sitting writing in the back of somebody's house in a bedroom and all of that there. So
I remember you telling me. I remember you telling me when I got out. It was probably one of your. Maybe it was one of your stories. You were well known then and still are for your stories. That when they did the raid on 170, as part of the lifting of all of the editorial staff of Danny and Tom and all the rest, that they took the telex machine and they threw it out the window and smashed it, not realizing it wasn't our machine, it belonged to the post office, who then had to replace it.
And it's a strange situation. Just funny you're saying that. The person who came, there was a responsibility in the post office because the machine was on hire, and strictly speaking, nothing illegal had been sent out on the machine. There was stuff, I suppose, that was politically kind of anti-establishment, but not illegal. Gerry McCrory, who later on joined the National Graves, was the telecom engineer who was sent out to replace the machine. And he thought he was getting arrested as well when he arrived. The Brits were still hanging about, and he arrived with this new machine to put it in. So they gave us a more updated machine, which was a bonus. Exciting period, the papers back out again, were distributing across all of that. And so you've kind of caught the attention of those people who would be at that stage in the leadership of the movement. It's clear that there are bad times both ahead and we've just came through. So when did you leave the Republican Press Centre?
The party decided, we went through the hunger strike period, which was, for all of us, hugely difficult. I remember the two of us in the car driving up, actually getting stopped by some Republican activists at the roundabout at Twinbrook as we were making our way up to Bobby's funeral. And stopping us and having to say to them, hang on a second, you can't stop us. We're organising the funeral, we have to be there. And the guy going, oh, go quick, way you go. So the hunger strike period was hugely traumatic for all of us. And it wasn't just the lads down on hunger strike, it was the folks who were, particularly the children who were getting killed with plastic bullets, the funerals, the constant harassment, the riots that were taking place. 170 right on the front of, or by that stage we were in 5153 Falls Road. And you were right in the middle of all of the riots that took place generally on the back of any of the hunger strikers down. And then we moved through that period, and in 1982 we decided to stand, if you remember, candidates for the assembly. I think you stood in the north of the city.
Yeah, I stood in North Belfast.
And I always remember this BBC Spotlight doing a program one night, and it was Barry, what's his name?
Barry Khan,
I think it was. Was doing the program, and they were doing an assessment of how all the parties were going to do. And they had us down at 3%, and it was the case of, look, they're going to get such a low vote, we're not going to talk about them, we're not even going to bother dealing with them tonight, and moved on. And then in the election, we got 10% of the vote. Gerry was elected in the west of the city, Jim McAllister was elected, Danny was elected up in Tyrone, Martin was elected, and Francie Malloy were elected. And it was shock horror. It was, the media went bonkers at the idea that
this happened.
It was crazy. And so that was all that was going on. And then they decided the following year that we would stand in the Westminster elections. And somebody had the bright idea that, because for whatever reason, I got asked to stand in, I wasn't asked, I was told that I was standing in for Lagan Valley. So I was to challenge Jim Molyneux. And I think you were back again in the north of the city.
I was, yeah.
That was me out of the press office, essentially, at that stage, because I then had this different role, which was an organisational role up in essentially Twinbrook and Phoblacht. That was an experience as well. Really good people, sound people.
When did this marriage of convenience or success with Gerry, how did it come about? When did it come about, first of all, and how did it come about?
Well, Gerry claims that I was his first censor. It started at one point in 75, I think. I had been the PRO for the cage, but then at one point I also became the PRO for the camp. So Gerry was in the cage next to me, and he started to write his brownie pieces for the Rep News. But the rule in the cage, in the camp, was very simple. You didn't send anything out for publication unless it was cleared by me or by whoever the camp PRO was. But at that point, it was me. So every week, Gerry was writing his brownie articles, and he had to throw it in his tin across from his cage into my cage. So I had to read it, agree it was okay, and then send it back to him and tell him it was okay, he could send it out. Now, in all honesty, I never changed the word, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
His belief or his claim is that I was his first censor. That was really my first contact with Gerry. And then after that, through the 80s, through the hunger strike, I mean, we were all on the same committees, planning and plotting the same politics. But when I started working for Gerry directly was just before the cessation in August '94. The party had, the leadership had realised that clearly that was going to change the dynamics of the struggle, and that while we had done a good job of reorganising, trying to make the party fit for purpose and so on, it was going to make things very different. And they decided that Gerry needed to have somebody working permanently with him who was dealing with the media, dealing with the press.
Keep him under control.
Yeah. Never, absolutely never. Nobody ever kept Gerry Adams under control. And that's when I got, so I remember being asked, put into a house just off Leeson Street for a meeting and being explained to what was going on and saying, right, we want you to do this. Are you going to do it? What are you going to say? No?
Well, yeah. Was it, and I know you take most things in your stride. You've just got that sort of personality that, you know, you consider things and you move and you generally move forward. Was it a daunting experience? Did you doubt that you had the ability to do it? Was it something that you kind of way in your head were preparing yourself for?
It was a big challenge. It was daunting. But it was all going to be so new and so different. And it was a direction that I was very keen that we go down. So I was up for the challenge.
Yeah.
But I was also very nervous. We were going into new, different circumstances. None of us knew how it was going to work out. Nobody, in terms of the peace process, one of the reasons the Brits always screwed around with the process was because they had learned early on, given their experience of peace processes, of negotiations, that when you get involved in a negotiation process, you never know where it's going to go. You can never be in complete control, particularly if there's all these other disparate groups involved and governments and political parties and God knows what else going on. So it's a very dangerous project to get involved in, and you can lose control and you can find yourself in places you don't expect to be or want to be. And I suspect that was one of the big motivations for the Brits during that whole period, and probably still is.
Yeah.
They're afraid. We saw it as a challenge, and a challenge that we were ready for. They saw it as a challenge that they were ready for and still aren't.
At the time, Gerry And there's always been this pride, I think, for Republicans that there is a collective leadership. And I think that's quite true. And you can see it in the progression of leadership, north and south. But at the time, Gerry was very much the face of the public face of Republican leadership. And he was thrust in to defend everything that Republicans done and to explain everything that Republicans done. That scrutiny, as you say, has never stopped. And you can see it currently with some sections of the media. And locked in beside him in all of these events is you, standing with a tape recorder or standing beside him or standing to the side. Which is a very difficult job, I have to say, you know, because obviously you're part of a team. There's you and Gerry, and you're doing this. Were you nervous about that? Were you frustrated about it, given the regularity of the statements and the requests and the demand from sections of the media that you and Gerry in the public face, you working with them, that you explain every single thing and defend or attack everything that Republicans done? Was there that kind of a press comment? Did you become short-tempered with journalists? Did you develop a working relationship? Did you come to hate them or love them?
Well, first of all, I have to say I was very fortunate because I was part of the team. There is the leadership, and the leadership is a collective leadership, and Gerry is always, and Martin, always prided themselves on making sure that everybody was part of that team effort. But I was also fortunate because I was part of a team in and around Gerry. It wasn't just me. There was Siobhan O'Hanlon, there was Aidan McAteer, and there were others. And you know, we worked very well and very closely together. Gerry was an MP as well as being the party leader. So there was community work to be done. There was the organisational political work of the party to be done. And then there was the peace processing work to be done. And then eventually, as a consequence of the cessations, we end up with this process of having to travel, and particularly to the USA, which at times was exhausting. I mean, it was really exhausting. First time we went to the US was the month after the first cessation. We were there 4 weeks. It sounds really, you know, it's great crack, but it was 4 weeks and you were traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast, a city every other day. Gerry was having to talk to Irish Americans, but he was also having to talk to the media. It was a very exhausting process. So that was all part of the mix. But I was really lucky. It was a really good team of folks in and around Gerry. So, and Gerry himself is very focused. So statements, you know, Gerry likes to have a hands-on approach when it comes to the writing of statements, writing of articles, the writing of speeches. And he's very good. And you know yourself, there's times Gerry will want the speech, but he could get up, set the speech to one side and just do it. And he's done that very, very often. So I was very lucky that way.
You mentioned that trip into America, that kind of nearly bursting upon the scene, that here you are engaging Irish America, our cousins, who for lots of Irish nationalists are seen to be on our side. So with you went this kind of hope, aspiration, and I hope he's doing well. And you're right, you know, you talk about those distances, there's thousands of miles of travel, thousands of miles, and they're engaging right across the spectrum. Was the madness, you know, did you, you know, I've seen scrums in New York, Gerry, and there are as many journalists around them as there are people on protests. Mm. So because it's your job, you talk about being part of a team, and of course you are, but it's your job between them and Gerry and you. So how do you try and control that, or do you ever control it?
Most journalists, whether here or in the US, are respectable when it comes to the people they're going to interview. You'll get some who will be pushy and nasty and so on. And we've had our fair share of those over the years. But Gerry's very good at dealing with that sort of thing. We had on that first trip, there was a couple of guys, I'm not going to name anybody, but there was a couple of guys, there was one English journalist in particular, who his paper paid for him to follow us to every city. And it was solely for the purpose of asking Gerry every time about the IRA, trying to create distractions and diversions away from the message of the peace process and of bringing about change and of inclusive negotiations and all of that. And I watched Gerry on more than one occasion politely, firmly, and in a very funny way put that guy down. But he was being paid to do his job, and he continued to do it. So the media thing is difficult enough, but Irish America were very welcoming. They wanted the message. They wanted to hear what was going on. They wanted to talk to Gerry. But I have to say, our best allies often in those circumstances were the Brits, because the Brits made such a meal of it. They made such a mess of it. They created this image of this horrible person. Yeah. So everyone wanted to see this horrible person. And then when they saw the horrible person, they realized, well, he's not the ogre that we're being told that he is. I mean, on one occasion, I think it was early '95, there was this whole negotiation going on about us getting the right to fundraise in the USA. And Clinton had agreed to do that. I think it was that, or else it was the visa. No, I think it was the fundraising. Decided to give the fundraising and so on. And John Major wouldn't speak to the guy for a week. Wouldn't take a phone call. Wouldn't phone him up. Wouldn't take a call from Clinton's. The president of the United States is ringing for John Major, and John Major saying, "No, I don't want to talk to you." And everybody knew about it. It's just mad. And then there were other journalists, again, some I won't mention, who are pretty despicable characters, who used to talk about the smell of cordite around Gerry Adams. Yeah. Well, in the US, that actually made it a more interesting story for the journalists. So when they thought they were having a go and they were ridiculing and putting them down, they were contributing to this image of this leader, who then, when they heard him speak, they realized he's talking sense. These people are talking sense.
As well as meeting these high-flying, I want to return to Downing Street just for a moment, but let me just put this to you. As well as these high world leaders, you mentioned Clinton and the Clintons and all of that, there were the celebrities that people saw in films, or they heard bits and pieces of scandal about, that had embraced the peace process by their support. And I remember, I think it was Willie Nelson helped to organise one of Gerry's birthday parties that happened at a time when he was in America, or went to a party. There's some story about it. Did you engage with those? And if you did, how did you find,
Generally, you find a lot of those folks have Irish American roots, and they're not mad Republican supporters, Irish Republican supporters. They're not necessarily up to speed, or weren't necessarily up to speed with everything that was going on in Ireland, but they knew there was an effort to bring about real change. Most of them, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, some cases going back several more generations even than that, had fled to the US because of the Great Hunger, or because of the Tan and the Civil Wars and so on. So they had an interest. And they wanted to hear what Gerry had to say, and I again, they were always very, they were interested, and they came along to listen. And some of them are still very good friends, and they maintain that contact. And so do the politicians. The people on. One of the things we decided very early on was that we wouldn't get ourselves involved in internal US politics.
Yeah, sure.
Our interest, Ireland. Peace process, Irish unity, it's about the British out of Ireland, the British government out of Ireland, and a new Ireland and a new shared Ireland. So it's not our business to deal with American politics. And so we would talk to whoever was prepared to talk to us. And we had good friends on in both the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, and some who were not in either party. Business people like Bill Flynn, very sound man. Always had a very sharp eye to what was going on here as well as in the USA. And they all stayed very, very strong and very true to the process. I mean, Gerry did the interview for Féile with Congressman Richard Neal. Richie's been with this going back to the 90s, and so have so many others. So we've been very lucky, very, very, very lucky in our friends.
I mentioned just in passing, and I threatened to come back to it, the first meeting in Downing Street, the first kind of Republican delegation that goes to Downing Street. Were you conscious of the fact that what you were doing? I mean, I know people here who were crying when they seen Republicans get into Downing Street, and they weren't even handcuffed; they were just walking in. Were you conscious of the fact of the imagery of that representation, that kind of we're bringing the hopes and aspirations of so many people with us? And if you were, what was R.G. McAuley's, not the job, what was your kind of view of it? Did you know the moment? Did you have a sense of the moment?
I think we all had, all of us who were on that delegation, we knew it was history in the making, but we were there for very serious business.
But you're still a human.
Yeah. Oh no, we're still human, and we're walking into Downing Street. I don't know if you would remember probably better than me. At one point, Gerry, sometime in the 80s, went over with a letter which he handed into 10 Downing Street as part of a protest about what was going on here at the time. So he'd been there before, although he hadn't got past the front door. No, we were very mindful of the historic nature of the meeting itself, and the world's media was planked across from the front door, photographing and filming the delegation as it went in. So we were all very conscious of that, but I have to say, we were equally conscious of the fact that we were there to do business. We weren't there to have a good time. We weren't there to be nicey with Tony Blair and his folks. Although, and it's a story that's often told, one of the things when we got into the cabinet room for the meeting, I can't remember if it was Martin McGuinness or Martin Ferris. I think it was Martin McGuinness said to Blair, "So this is where the dirty deed was done." But Martin had in his head that it was the signing of the treaty.
Yeah.
Whereas Tony Blair had his head that it was a murder attack on Downing Street.
Yeah, well, you would. I mean, it's...
So, we were thinking politics. They were thinking something else entirely different. And then they started telling us about how the windows came in and you all had to go onto the table. And we weren't interested in that at all.
And there was no sympathy at all for them. No.
Oh, later on, to be fair, now, at one point, Tony Blair was with Gerry, and I think Bertie was there at the time as well. And they were in the garden down at the back of Downing Street, and Blair was showing them the holes in the walls where the mortars had picked out taken bits out of the walls. So, but no, we were there doing business, and we knew it was only the start of a process.
Yeah.
That it wasn't the end of it. That this wasn't going to be like the treaty where you go in and you spend a week and somehow you come out with something at the other end which turns out to be a disaster. That this was going to be a process that was going to take years. And so it's a bit like, as you know yourself from involvement in all of our elections over the years, you fight this election with your eye to the next election and even the one after that. And this was true of negotiations. You went into this negotiation thinking about what you were going to get out of it or what you weren't going to get out of it, and therefore what was on the agenda for the next negotiation and for the one after that, or where you wanted to go. It was always, Gerry and Martin were always very focused on the importance of this being seen as a process.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask you two other questions in terms of yourself. I don't know anyone in my life that works as hard as that team that or work as hard as that team that you're referring to, yourself and Gerry and others, but just for the purpose of this interview, yourself and Gerry. So this is a 7-day-a-week job. Be on standby. Don't get drunk. Don't be arranging to go on holidays that could be cancelled at the last minute, and all of that. And you actually do. You do get holidays cancelled. You don't. You get phone calls in the middle of the night, and middle of the night convenes meetings and all of that. And all of this is happening while you have a whole pile of kids. You're home for a week. You're away for 3 weeks, or you're home for a week and you're away for 2 days, or all of that. Did you find it taking a toll on you physically? Did it affect your health? Like all Republicans, I assume, it's difficult on your family, but did you find it kind of like, so was it a draining process?
Well, let me just say that the person, on reflection, the person who I can recall who had the most holidays cancelled on him was Gerry Kelly. Gerry, God help him, there would be something would happen, and Gerry would have had a holiday booked for somewhere or other, and the day before it was cancelled, and it happened to him numerous times. But it's an occupational hazard. The process was such that things change sometimes very quickly, and you just had to be ready for it. You had to be ready to catch the bouncing ball. And whoever caught the bouncing ball, they were in control, and we wanted to make sure that was us. I mean, there were times when it was very tiring, it was very exhausting, but that was true for everybody. I mean, you would when you were a councillor in North Belfast, an organiser, doing all of the things that you've done, you had the same issues of it was a 24-hour-a-day job, 7 days a week. The good thing about it now is we're not getting awakened in the middle of the night with some journalists telling us that there's been a bomb attack and somebody's been killed, or a comrade's been shot, or someone we know has been taken from us, or whatever. That's in the past, and that's good.
As well as all of what we've talked about, the politics of your life, and you describe it as work, and it's obviously a vocation more than work. You had and have a passion for science fiction. And I know you have been working on a bestseller for a number of years. And also music. Stevie Wonder was someone at that stage you were very close to, musically and spiritually, not physically. Are you still working on the book? Or are you,
No.
Was it the book? And I can't recall, was there something to do with comics as well?
No. It was, at one point in my existence, I decided I would try and write something other than politics. At the time, I was working in the 6th County office with Mary Hughes.
Yeah.
And I managed to get a few chapters done. And Mary, being the sneak as she was, managed to get the chapters. I had printed them off, and they were sitting on the desk. And Mary, I don't know how I managed to get a hold of them. She thought they were good, but it never got beyond that. So it's maybe at some point in the future when things are less hectic, when I actually get round to the point of retiring, which I don't foresee for some time yet. And I like music. I always have liked music. Stevie Wonder was a particular favourite. I used to drive some of my comrades in Case 12 bunkers, playing Stevie Wonder LPs. I think there was a time when they were glad after they were glad with the fire, because my record player got burned in the fire, so they didn't have to listen to him anymore. No, I like music, and even now, if I go training up to the gym, I'll stick the earphones in and put on some good music. Not necessarily Stevie Wonder. I like a lot of different music.
It always struck me is, and there is a trend, and I'm glad that it exists, where Republicans feel obliged to write books. Some are better than others. That's just the reality of writing. And you haven't written a political book. Is that deliberate, or is that something that's, you know, for further down the road?
Maybe at some point. I don't think I would write a political book. What I would like to do is Bernadette O'Hagan.
Yes,
maybe.
from Lagan, yeah.
She wrote a book for her family about her life, about growing up in Lagan, about the experiences they went through. And it's a book. It isn't a couple of thousand words. It's a real book. I think they published a couple of hundred copies, but again, it was only for the family. I thought it was brilliant. It was a really, really good book, very interesting, and it told about her life. I would like to do something like that, more for the family, not for any other purpose. I think that would be, because I think at some point when I'm not here, the kids, the grandkids, the great grandkids, it would be useful for them to have some idea of what we went through as a community. And
I'll be able to tell your story anyway. You'll go before me.
Yes, well, possibly, but let's not dwell. Let's not dwell on that. I mean, that's what I'm doing. I mean, I would help Gerry in terms of doing research for the stuff that he does. So I've got plenty to be writing about and plenty of work to be doing for
I think it would be a very interesting read, and I think it would be an interesting read because it is primarily it's the same experience but with a different eye and from a different direction.
I think all of that's very important, Joe, because the more people tell their own stories and leave those stories for the next generation and the generations after that, the easier it will be for people to understand what we went through. I mean, I know from talking to some young people now, and you'd be talking about the 70s or the 80s and collusion and what the Brits did and what the RUC did and all of that. And they are amazed. They don't understand it. They can't comprehend how it happened and how it was allowed to go on for as long as it went on. So I think we have an obligation at some point, each of us, in telling our own stories as much as we can.
I think you're right, and I find myself as I get older catching my breath and thinking about, and you mentioned various periods of struggle, but when we think about our engagement, say for instance during the hunger strike, we were in our 30s, our early 30s, and physically and also politically, we were combating the might of a British establishment that was propagandizing the murder of Irish Republicans around the world. And leaving aside the difficulty of that task, there was a physical danger that we were in, rightly or wrongly. But let me move on from that. And we should document that. Tom Hartley has a great phrase, and I was there when he discovered it, found it, or repeated it. And he used to say, "The last man alive writes the book." And he used it as a threat. So you're going to go before me, McAuley, and I'm going to write about you. And he might well be right. I know that a large percentage of your work was here in Ireland, and it was engagement and lobbying. A lot of it was private, and a lot of it was behind the scenes. A lot of it is yet to be told, and that's fine. That's okay. But there are highlights that were in the public domain, and one of them for me was your attendance at the funeral of Madiba, of Nelson Mandela. Tell me just a wee bit about that. We haven't got a lot of time left. We've got about 10 minutes left. So tell me a wee bit about how you ended up in the Guard of Honour for Nelson Mandela.
Well, first of all, Republicans have had a long standing relationship with the ANC. So consequently, in '95, a group of us went to South Africa, and it was to talk to the ANC about negotiations, how they negotiated, the tactics, the strategies they employed, the language they used, the compromises they might have had to make. And we had that time, and it would take too long to explain. We had this what was called the strategy of oh shit, I can't remember it now, it's gone through my head. But we had a strategy about how you make compromise at a particular point in a negotiation, but it's in order to make further gains down the road. So you might make a strategic compromise now, but later on it pays off. So we wanted to talk to them about all of that. And the ANC were brilliant. They brought us round. They visited Durban, Cape Town, Joburg, somewhere else, and they arranged for us to meet not just all of their negotiators, they also arranged for us to meet some of the National Party negotiators as well. So in a sense, you were talking to the unionists of the South African situation. But we did the meeting with, we had arranged the meeting with Madiba, with Mandela, and Robert McBride, whom you know,
yes, yeah,
was involved in, and we went into the building in Joburg, went up, and Robert brought us up early, too early. So we arrived at Madiba's door as he was going out in order to do another meeting before he met with our delegation. And he saw us, big smile on his face, grabbed Gerry by the hand, shook his hand. And at that time, the Brits had been making much about, we shouldn't go to South Africa, we shouldn't be allowed in South Africa, the ANC shouldn't meet us, Mandela shouldn't meet us, there should be no public handshake, there should be, it was all that nonsense. Mandela grabbed Gerry by the hand, he says, "Comrade Gerry, I won't wash my hand for a week." And then later on, we did the meeting with them, and that was one of my personal highlights, because the night before, Gerry and I were talking, and we had decided that it would be nice if we had a joint statement issued by Gerry and Madiba. So I wrote a draft. We brought it in. I sat with Madiba's PR guy. We made some amendments to it, and then that became the joint statement. So for me, that was a personal highlight, that I helped to write a statement for not just Gerry, but for Mandela. It was very good. That was a highlight. And then when he died, we went to South Africa for the funeral, and we went to the ANC. We went to various aspects of the funeral, but we went to where the ANC were themselves saying goodbye, and they asked Gerry and me if we would do the Guard of Honour. And Urko from the Basque Country was with us. So we all went up and were part of the group who stood and who were able to pay our respects to a great man.
I know we're in the last few minutes, and I know from working with you that you are an internationalist, that you're someone who've always seen solidarity as a responsibility of those in struggle. I know that, you don't need to tell me that, but I mean, it must have been, as you say, it must have been an amazingly moving situation for someone to be part of Mandela, the man that epitomizes for many people global struggle. So
no, it was a good moment.
And I also have to say, you brought back a Christmas card for me from Mandela. So I have that. But let me just our last few minutes. Hopes for the future and plans for the future. So you've got a crystal ball in front of you. So where does all of this take us?
My objective in life is, I think, our objective in life is to get Irish unity. That's everything I have learned in my years of struggle, of being part of this struggle, has just reinforced the view I had a long time ago, that we will never have peace on the island of Ireland as long as there is a British government involved in our affairs. It's not going to happen. And we're not going to have, I like to think of myself as I don't use the phrase, but I like to think of myself as a colony Republican. I think Connolly wrote so much that was wise about our struggle and about Ireland and about society. If we want to see a society which is genuinely based on equality, where people are not exploited, where workers' rights are defended and promoted, then you're not going to get that as long as there's partition. So, on the one hand, there's the national aspiration of wanting a united Ireland, but there's also the practical application of wanting a different kind of Ireland. For some, it's a socialist republic. However one describes it, however people want to describe it, you're not getting it as long as there is partition. So if you're a Republican, if you're a socialist, then you have to want to end partition. And the vehicle for doing that is Sinn Féin. Nobody else. Others have their part to play. Others have their role to play. We need to embrace and include as many people as possible in the struggle in the weeks, the months, and the years ahead, as we seek the referendum on Irish Unity and as we seek to win that referendum. But for me, the vehicle for that is Sinn Féin.
I want to give you a chance, an opportunity of a lifetime. You know, we have a...
That's a trap of a record.
It is a trap, of course. We have thousands of viewers, as you probably know. So...
Glad you're only telling me that now. You told me it was only a half a dozen.
No. It's many, many, many more. So do you want to take this opportunity and just getting your own back on Gerry Adams for just torturing you this last 30 years? You can either tell a secret about him, or you can tell a story about him, or you can just use it as a threat.
No.
Okay. Well, don't say that I never give you the opportunity. So let me say this, for being my guest and being my friend. It was a great interview. We'll talk again.
Will do.